Hi everyone, welcome back to Go Local Live. I'm Go Local News editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us this Wednesday afternoon for news and politics. Had General Treasurer Seth Magaziner, Dr. Jake Curtis from the Brown Warren Alpert Medical School, and now familiar face Jennifer Lawless, Professor of Political Science at the University of Virginia. Jennifer, thank you for joining us.
Happy to be with you.
Well, of course, what is dominating the news cycle the last few days and looks like it will continue to do so for the foreseeable future, obviously the tragedies in El Paso and Dayton, and of course the role President Donald Trump has been playing in the aftermath. Now, comments made today about the shooter in Dayton and what he said is the shooter's left-leaning indications on social media, and how he brought that into the conversation and what the reaction's been. So talk with us a little bit as we break this down, Jennifer. I'm assuming not surprising, but what's the reaction been?
Well, I think the reaction has come in lots of different waves. First of all, we know that in both El Paso and Dayton, the communities themselves have not been very excited about Donald Trump's arrival. And we saw in Dayton earlier today, for example, that he made no public remarks, that he went to the hospital and met with first responders and some of the families, but that probably because of the fallout and because so much of this has been linked to the rhetoric that he's used, people just don't want to have anything to do with him, and they don't want him, they don't think of him as a consoler in chief. The second dynamic is that there's variation in the extent to which the president is being personally blamed, especially for the shooting in El Paso. But there does seem to be broad consensus that his rhetoric and his words and the language that he's used over the course of the last 2 or 3 years has certainly motivated this kind of hatred and this kind of attack and this general embrace, at least among some people, of white supremacy. He has distanced himself from that, and he has said that, you know, it's not his fault. He has said that his rhetoric has brought people together. He has said that it's the internet that causes people to pull a trigger. It's, you know, video games that cause people to pull triggers. And here I think there are two different things at stake, right? The first is the idea that there's no trigger to pull if we have fewer guns, and he's not willing to talk about that in the first place. The second is if he's distancing himself, then it's very, very hypocritical, I think, for him to argue that the Dayton massacre can in any way be linked to Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or any sort of left-wing rhetoric. So you can't use the argument when it works for you and throw it away when it works against you. And that's what this president is doing.
And, you know, as we know, in the light of these horrific tragedies, what happened all too common, how many more days of this?
It's tricky to know. I mean, there might be more days just because this was 3 tragedies like this over the course of 8 days. And so it might have a little bit more staying power. But as far as the Republicans are concerned and the Republican leadership is concerned, they plan to do nothing. Mitch McConnell is not willing to do anything about this. He's not willing to move forward on any sort of legislation. The Senate is not in session right now anyway. He certainly does not look like he's inclined to bring them back to address this. Tim Ryan is apparently planning a caravan to go from Ohio to Kentucky to try and encourage Mitch McConnell, but I think that'll just be viewed by the right as a political stunt. So I see very little coming of this. You know, we've seen now over the course of the last several days, Democratic lawmakers push time and again for more meaningful legislation. We've seen state legislators in both Ohio and Texas say that this is what they plan to do, although the Texas state legislature doesn't come back until 2021. And you've got Republicans across the board just saying no, and it's a non-starter, and we should be focusing on mental health. And I just don't think that this one is going to be any different than the last several that we've seen over the course of the last few years, unfortunately.
We did see remarks from President Trump geared towards Beto O'Rourke, presidential candidate, pointing to his polling numbers and actually telling him to be quiet. Let's talk a little bit about that Democratic field for president, the fallout from the last debates. And as you mentioned, moving forward, the bar is higher to make that debate stage for this 3rd set of debates. Let's talk about the new numbers and what the current landscape currently looks like.
The good news for Joe Biden is that he remains at the top in all polls. The bad news for Joe Biden is that Elizabeth Warren is gaining ground. She's beating Bernie Sanders out in the most recent polls for 2nd place. And that suggests that the progressive wing of the party that was very much in favor of both Sanders and Warren, might be coalescing behind Warren. It's too early to tell, obviously, but based on her debate performance, there might be some movement there, which means that Joe Biden in the next set of debates probably won't be taking on Kamala Harris. It might be more of a taking on Elizabeth Warren. As far as the rest of the candidates are concerned, the second debate was generally not good news for them. Cory Booker had a very impressive performance, and we don't see his poll numbers move at all. Kamala Harris demonstrated that she wasn't really ready for prime time, and she wasn't ready to be treated like a top-tier candidate, and her numbers now are back to where they were prior to that first debate. So this is still very much a 3 or a 4 person race, and none of those top 4 should be counted out. But I think that we're beginning to see a Biden-Warren fight shape up. Now, the one thing I will add is that Joe Biden has been incredibly compelling regarding these shootings, and he's been all over the media. He's also been talking about his own personal tragedies. And if people are looking for an alternative to Donald Trump at a time like this, it's hard to see somebody with more empathy, more compassion, and a better ability to relate to the American people based on his own or her own experiences than Joe Biden. And so, although I don't think in any way he's trying to politicize what happened, he might benefit from these events just because the juxtaposition to Donald Trump couldn't be any more dramatic.
So what do you think, before we talk about looking forward, I do want to take a look back at the debate format. Very heavily criticized, again, by that cattle call approach. All the candidates seem to get cut off by moderators just about the 14.9 second mark. Do you think we'll see changes moving forward by media as to how they approach the debates? Because, again, there was a lot of critique that the efficacy might not have been there for candidates to get their message out.
Right. It was awful. The format was absolutely terrible. And the only candidate that followed the rules was Joe Biden, who would actually at 15 seconds just stop, even if he was mid-sentence, in which he did himself no favors either, right? So the one candidate that played by the rules doesn't get a reward for playing by the rules when nobody else is. I don't know. I think what winds up happening is we have to see how many candidates qualify. You know, right now, I believe 8 candidates have qualified for the third debate. If we wind up with 16 or 18 who qualify, it's going to look very much the same. If we go down to 8, then I think what the debate commission needs to figure out and what the media needs to figure out are whether they should all be on one stage where it'll be more of this, or whether there should again be 2 debates, but you've got maybe 4 or 5 candidates who can actually articulate answers and, you know, separate themselves. But if you think about it, the fact that Biden emerged as the winner in one debate and Warren emerged as the winner in another debate tells us very, very little, because voters haven't seen the 2 of them next to each other on the debate stage yet. So, you know, people are still making their assessments in somewhat of a vacuum.
So what do we expect moving forward? As you said, the Democratic candidates all clamoring, the ones that aren't meeting the criteria currently for that third debate. What do you think really dictates the next few weeks, Jennifer, as they're jockeying for position and poll numbers?
I think that it's going to come down not to the poll numbers, but to meeting the donor threshold, because that's going to be a lot easier than moving from 0 or less than 1% in the polls to tripling your support at 3. It is possible, Marianne Williamson has shown us this, to find hundreds of thousands of people out there who are willing to give you money. When I ran for Congress, I wish I knew that that was true. It turns out that I think that might be an easier threshold and an easier bar to meet. But at this point, you know, I think we'll also start seeing gimmicks. We'll start seeing things like Tim Ryan lead a caravan, because that's going to generate media coverage. It's going to generate attention. People will start paying attention. And if that can lead him to get from 1 to 3% in the polls, that's enough to live another day. So these are not gimmicks that necessarily have to win you the nomination. They just have to keep you alive another day.
Well, we appreciate, as always, you're taking the time to Skype in and give us a little bit of a glimpse into what to look for in the political realm. But of course, all eyes on the tragedies in El Paso and Dayton, and then looking to see, moving forward, the Democratic field for 2020. So Jennifer Lawless down at UVA, thank you so much for taking the time to Skype in. We look forward to seeing you soon.
See you soon.
Okay, we'll let Jennifer Lawless go, and we're going to let you go here at downtown Providence on GoLocal Live. Another full day. General Treasurer Seth Magaziner, Dr. Jake Curtis from Brown's Warren Alpert Medical School on a breakthrough for a potential vaccine for malaria, and of course Jennifer Lawless taking national politics and making them local. We'll see you back here tomorrow with more GoLocal Live, but of course in the meantime, catch us on GoLocalProv.com Find us on Facebook, and we'll see you in the morning. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel.